Good morning, everyone. Christmas is coming, but there's been no miracle to avert strikes on the railways. The RMT has rejected a pay offer and announced more stoppages, an escalation that the Transport Secretary described as incredibly disappointing. Rail strikes will take place as planned on the 13th and 14th of December, and then on the 16th and 17th of December. New strikes have been announced for the Christmas holidays. They'll start at 6 p.m. on Christmas Eve and run until the morning of the 27th of December. More strikes are also planned for the start of the new year on the 3rd and 4th of January and on the 6th and 7th of January. Oh, my goodness. Dan, standing by for us in Bristol. This is just not what people wanted to hear, is it, Dan? Good morning.
Morning, Kay. It really isn't. It is going to be a month of strikes in December, really starting that winter of discontent. As you say, this latest strike action being announced by the RMT will start at 6 p.m. on Christmas Eve. That big Christmas getaway, which sees stations like Bristol Temple Meads incredibly busy. People heading from London to this big junction where they change to go north, to go Wales, to go to the southwest, are going to face severe disruption. 6 p.m. it starts, as you say, on Christmas Eve, right through till 6 a.m. on the 27th. Now, usually, of course, there aren't many trains that run on Christmas Day and Boxing Day, but it will be the disruption caused by the Network Rail workers going on strike, which will have a massive knock-on effect either side of those dates in the run-up to Christmas. And it comes on top of those strike dates, which already start next week, 13th and 14th, the 16th and 17th, and into dates in January. This, of course, is all over this long-running dispute between the unions and rail bosses and Network Rail over pay, over jobs, over reforms and conditions. Now, this latest offer, there are actually two negotiations going on with RMT. One with the Rail Delivery Group, one with Network Rail. This latest offer from Network Rail is being put actually in an electronic referendum to its members. That closes on Monday, but the recommendation from Mick Litch, the RMT General Secretary, is for its members to reject them. The pay offers on the table at the minute are around 4 to 5% in terms of a pay increase. What they're really concerned about, the unions, is the conditions and the changes, things like drivers operating doors and the closure of ticket offices. As I say, a winter of discontent, because it's not just railway workers who are striking and the passengers who are going to face disruption. We're looking at Royal Mail, nurses, firefighters, teachers, bus drivers, all planning strike action over the festive period. And as I say, not just the passengers here and across the country who are going to face disruption. Businesses as well are going to be impacted. UK Hospitality yesterday warning that the impact for them in December is going to be circa £1.5 billion.
OK, thank you. And we'll be speaking to a government minister about that. Lots of other things as well. About 7:15 here on the programme, so do stay tuned for more on that. Meantime, questions are being raised about images used in Harry and Meghan's explosive Netflix trailer. Criticism has focused on a picture which shows a group of photographers supposedly fighting for a snap of the royal couple, but which was in fact from a Harry Potter premiere in 2011. No royals attended. And it's now claimed that at least 4 images used to promote the series are not what they seem. Let's get more with Martha.
No one knows the full truth. We know the full truth.
The question now is whether Harry and Meghan's truth, laid out in this new documentary, tallies with the recollection of others and public record.
There's a hierarchy of the family. You know, there's leaking, but there's also planting of stories.
The claims are certainly explosive and damning for the royal family. But what about the legitimacy of the pictures used to illustrate them? This image used in the trailer to show an apparent feeding frenzy around Meghan. It was taken at a Harry Potter premiere 5 years before the couple met. And a picture of them seemingly being stalked by a photographer. In fact, an authorised press call. Netflix has paid Harry and Meghan around £90 million for a number of collaborative projects. But there's no doubt about it, the true value for the streaming giant lies behind this documentary series. They want to heighten anticipation ahead of its release, and they've been very successful in doing so.
It's a dirty game. The pain and suffering of women marrying into this institution, this feeding frenzy.
Any illusion of a truth brought about by the Queen's death shattered in a 50-second advert. A move which is likely to pit Harry and Meghan directly against the Prince and Princess of Wales. In America, now home to the couple and the bulk of the Netflix audience, opinion is divided.
Harry and Meghan have their supporters and they have their detractors in the US just as they do in the UK. And those people who are, to coin a popular phrase, ride or die for Meghan and Harry really are just that. They are Team Sussex, Sussex Squad, and they will go to the mattresses for Harry and Meghan.
I had to do everything I could to protect my family.
The timing of the series release on Thursday, exactly 3 months after the Queen's death, a sting in the tail for the royal family. Another crisis for the new king, this time unleashed by his son and daughter-in-law. Martha Kellner, Sky News, Los Angeles.
Well, Ashna is outside Buckingham Palace for us this morning. First episode released on Thursday, I believe. Ashna, a question that a lot of people are asking is, given what we saw with previous interviews, what more is there to tell?
I think it's absolutely going to be incredibly explosive. I think there are going to be some quite damaging allegations, and I think many people waking up inside the palace behind me today will be feeling a little uncomfortable, perhaps some of them absolutely furious. On one hand, you've got people that say perhaps this is the right time for Harry and Meghan to have their say once again. Of course, they did do that explosive Oprah interview about a year and a half ago, but other people will argue, well, they're not being fact-checked, they're not being challenged in any of this documentary. This is in their own words, and that's already been highlighted in some of the promotional material that's been released. In 2 of the trailers, we have seen images, multiple images of the press, and we know that perhaps the blame with the UK press is going to be even more reinforced in this documentary, particularly by Harry himself. But there's some questions over the use of particularly images that show press with long lens cameras. Some of the images shown were taken from other events, and in fact where the couple weren't even present. In one of those images, it was taken whilst filming the reality TV star Katie Price. In another, they were filming Donald Trump's former lawyer Michael Cohen, and in another it was taken at the very last Harry Potter premiere here in London, in which, as you say, Kay, none of the royals were present. So some questions over exactly what material we're going to get. All whilst we're seeing that material, they're talking about being hounded by the UK press and alleging that those photographs are from events that perhaps they were at. Not only is the blame being appointed at the press, but also potentially at the family too, and at the institution, and that's where the worry is going to come. Of course, the palace, though, have to be quite strategic in their response. We're going to get the first part, as you say, of this docu-series on Thursday. They'll have to be quite strategic in what they say on that day, because they know that further down the line, come next week, there's going to be even more allegations on the table.
Let's move on to Ukraine. Russia's defence ministry has said that a Ukrainian drone attack caused explosions at 2 military air bases deep inside Russia. Ukraine has not claimed responsibility. Let's get more, should we? Diana standing by for us in Moscow. Good morning, Diana. The latest from where you are, please.
Hi, Kay. Yes, well, Ukraine never claims responsibility for these kinds of attacks on Russian territory. For example, on Crimea, which obviously isn't Russian territory, but which Russia claims it is. But as you say, this is the furthest that targets have been hit within Russia since the start of this war. 2 military air bases targeted, one 115 kilometres or miles southwest of Moscow, Ryazan, so pretty close to Moscow. Another around 400 miles from the border with Ukraine in southern Russia. So a long way away from Ukraine's borders. And both of those bases housed strategic military bombers that Russia has been using to target Ukraine's energy infrastructure and military infrastructure in Ukraine, over the course of the last 10 months. So there are a lot of questions now about how exactly Ukraine managed it. Do they have a drone capable of travelling that kind of a distance? Was this a missile? Was there some kind of counterintelligence failure within Russia that allowed a drone from within Russia, perhaps with the help of Ukrainian collaborators, to target these bases? A lot of questions being asked now in the military blogosphere about how exactly this was allowed to happen. Russia's response was, as you might expect again, to send another round of missiles into Ukraine. All of this started, of course, those missile strikes in Ukraine because of the attack on the Kerch Bridge linking Crimea with Russia. And we saw pictures from President Putin yesterday actually driving across that bridge to symbolise the fact that it's now been reopened to passenger transport. Interesting pictures if you have them to show.
We do. Thank you very much indeed, Diana, for the update. Yeah, those are the images that Diana was just talking about there. Back here in the studio, let's bring in the Schools Minister, Nick Gibb. Should we? Hello, Mr Gibb. It's good to see you this morning. Lots to talk about. Wondered if I could start with an 8th child, though, having died from strep A. Suggestions from one of your health ministers, Lord Markham, that if there's an outbreak of strep A in a class, then all those kids should get antibiotics. Is that something that you're going to do?
Well, it is a tragic for the parents of those 8 children who've lost their child due to this bacteria. And what the UK Health and Security Agency are doing is they're working closely with the schools involved and giving very specific advice to those schools, which may involve use of penicillin and so on. And they'll have more to say about that. And they're providing more general advice to parents, which is to look out for the symptoms, so a sore throat, fever, high temperature, and also a red or raised rash on the skin are symptoms of this invasive strep A outbreak.
One of the things that is your responsibility as a government is to keep these kids warm at school. Apparently the bills for energy have gone up 300%. What are you doing about it?
Well, a number of things. The Energy Relief Scheme, of course, is helping schools over this coming winter. And today we've also announcing £500 million of capital for schools. So a typical primary school will get £16,000 and a typical secondary school £42,000 to enable them very rapidly to put in place energy-saving measures like LED lighting or better lagging of pipes and better thermostat control to help them bring down their energy costs. And, of course, all this follows a major £2 billion extra funding for schools in the autumn statement, both next year and the year after, in addition to the money that had already been allocated to schools. It's a very good settlement for schools to help them deal with these kinds of pressures.
All 4 major teaching unions are balloting their members about possible strike action. Is this government losing control?
No, not at all. I understand the pressure that teachers and teaching assistants feel that they are under. We're all under pressure because of the cost of living, and we're trying to tackle that. And that's what the autumn statement did. It brought in a range of measures to help with the cost of living. Teachers' pay is determined by an independent pay review body, and this year, for this September, they were awarded a 5% increase across the board. But for young teachers coming into the profession the first year, it's an 8.9% pay settlement. We think
that below inflation, though, isn't it?
Well, strike action is not the answer to dealing with these negotiations. And children have already had a disrupted time during COVID. I think the last thing children need in our schools is for teachers to take strike action. I would urge them to continue talking, continue discussing. And, of course, it's the independent pay review body that will determine the pay for next year, and they have for this year. It's
not just schools, though, is it? I mean, we've seen the RMT again are now saying that they're going to strike over Christmas, from Christmas Eve to the day after Boxing Day. Your colleague Mark Harper hasn't got a grip on this either.
Well, he's urging the parties to get together. He's facilitating those discussions. But look, the RMT is a very disappointing decision. They've been offered by the employers 8% rise over 2 years. If you look at the pay settlements
below inflation,
but if you look at the pay settlements outside the public sector, they are generally in the 4 to 6% pay range. We simply cannot afford to pay the kind of pay demands that the unions like the RMT are paying. If all the unions' demands in the public sector were agreed, we'd be paying an extra £28 billion on the payroll. It's simply not affordable. We have to tackle the inflationary pressures in our economy. That's what we're seeking to do. That's what the autumn statement was all about. As well as introducing measures to help people with those cost of living increases, we also have to tackle inflation. That's what's causing households to pay higher bills. And these sorts of pay demands of 19% and so on are just not affordable in the public sector or indeed in the private sector. We just need the unions to work with their employers and not to hold the country to ransom.
Collective union action brings down governments.
Well, we are negotiating with the unions. We're talking to the teaching unions and the leadership unions, and Mark Harper is facilitating those discussions with the RMT.
Nowhere, it would appear.
But I think the public will not smile upon the RMT if they start disrupting train travel in the run-up to Christmas. It's a very cold time of year, as we know from the news about today's temperatures. But to do so in the run-up to Christmas, I think, is unacceptable, and you cannot have negotiations over pay while holding the country to ransom.
Okay.
We do understand the pressures, the cost of living pressures that people are facing, and that's what we sought to help deal with in the autumn statement that we had a few weeks ago.
OK, talk to me about the U-turn on housing. Your 2019 manifesto pledged to build 300,000 new homes a year. Why is the Prime Minister now changing his tune?
And we are committed to that. We want young people, and not so young people, to be able to get on the housing ladder. The Conservative Party, it's in our DNA for young people, for people to have their own home, to the property-owning democracy is part of what we stand for, and we are committed to that. It's not a U-turn. You need to work with parliamentarians. They represent people and their communities. We want there to be community consent to building more houses. That's how you deliver these targets of hundreds of thousands of new homes every year, to make sure that when you make decisions about where houses are going to be built...
so it's not a U-turn?
No, it's working with parliamentarians.
Okay. Is this a U-turn? Is this a U-turn? It looks as though the Prime Minister is going to say that onshore wind farms can go ahead.
This is all part of the normal process of taking a bill through Parliament. MPs represent 70 or 80,000
He told me in the summer that he was definitely not in favour of it, and now he's changing his mind. That's like 3 months.
The emphasis is on offshore wind. We are one of the world's leading suppliers of offshore wind. Something like 40% of our energy now comes from clean, renewable sources. 99% of solar power...
He told me in August that he would definitely not be in favour of onshore wind.
And as I said, our emphasis is still on offshore wind. But when you take legislation through Parliament, you have to discuss...
That's a U-turn.
You use the phrase U-turn. I use the phrase parliamentary democracy. This is the normal process of getting legislation through Parliament.
Why didn't he say that at the time?
You listen to members of Parliament, you talk to members of Parliament as you take measures through.
Why didn't he say that to me then?
The emphasis is still on offshore wind as the source of our wind. It's creating hundreds of thousands of jobs. It's, as I said, 40% of our power now comes from clean, renewable sources.
Why didn't he say it's a parliamentary process? What he said was, no, I am against onshore wind.
What he's said in the summer, what he's saying now, is that the emphasis must be on offshore wind. And that is still the position of the government. But, of course, we'll continue to talk to members of Parliament as we take this legislation through Parliament. And that is how our system has always worked, and it should always work. Well,
I'll have to let my viewers decide if it's a U-turn or not. Final thought before I let you go. Michelle Mone's office saying that she's going to take legal action about some of the claims being made about her company, or was it her company? Certainly she made, it appeared, a lot of money out of MedPro. £29 million, apparently, out of a £203 million contract. That's what the allegation is. These VIP lanes, not going to be great, are they, when we start looking at it?
Well, the issue of Baroness Mone, is under investigation, so it wouldn't be right for me to talk about that. But what I would say is, if you think back to the beginning of this COVID crisis, back in February, March 2020, the country desperately needed PPE in our hospitals. So that's what these issues like the VIP lane was all about, is about making sure that those people that could change their manufacturing processes to produce PPE, but that was the emphasis of the government, saving lives, getting that PPE into hospital. 5 billion pieces of PPE were produced as a consequence, and that did save hundreds of thousands of lives. OK, we must leave it there. We're out of time, but it's great to see you. Haven't seen you for ages. Thank you. Thanks for coming in. Thank you. Looking at the morning's papers for you now, we should start with the Daily Mail, probably, reporting there's fury about the claim in the Sussex's Netflix documentary that there's been a war on Meghan. The Express leads with that story as well, saying Harry accuses the palace of playing a dirty game, while the Sun goes with Sussex lies and videotape. The Guardian says the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, is to scrap compulsory house building targets after pressure from his backbenchers. And according to the Eye, antibiotics are to be given to all children in schools where there has been a case of strep A. Just hearing there from the Minister, suggesting that will be on a case-by-case basis. Still to come on the programme for you. With a wave of winter strikes threatening chaos over Christmas, speaking to the National Lead Officer at Unite, representing striking workers across several sectors.
speak to the former British ambassador to Russia, Sir Andrew Wood, as Ukraine warns of emergency blackouts after more missile strikes. With temperatures set to plummet in the coming days, ask a meteorologist at the Met Office just how cold could it get? Also making news this morning, parents are resorting to watering down baby formula, according to the charity Feed, which says some are also having to give infants unsuitable food as an alternative, like porridge. The British Pregnancy Advisory Service says the price of the cheapest formula brands have jumped 22% in the past year. The Health Security Agency has confirmed an 8th child has died from a strep A infection. Government warning parents to look out for symptoms. The infection usually causes a sore throat, a fever or a skin rash and is passed by a physical contact or through droplets from sneezing or coughing. A major incident's been declared in Wolverhampton after a fire engulfed several factory units. The West Midlands Fire Service said more than 100 firefighters were on the scene. The blaze has caused all nearby trains to be stopped. The actress Kirstie Alley has died at the age of 71, not long after being diagnosed with cancer. Some of her best-known work was in the long-running US sitcom Cheers. Alley's children paying tribute are describing her as incredible, fierce and loving. Kamali has more.
Kirstie Alley was a star of television and film in the 80s and 90s. Her children, True and Lily Parker, posted a tribute on Twitter saying their mother had passed away from a recently discovered cancer. She was 71. They said that she died surrounded by friends and family. Kirstie Alley was best known for her role as Rebecca Howe on the NBC sitcom Cheers. She joined the show at the height of its popularity in 1987 as the manager of the iconic bar, a role she would win an Emmy and Golden Globe for in 1991. Alley also starred alongside Bruce Willis and John Travolta in the 1989 film Look Who's Talking and its 2 sequels. John Travolta posted this on his Instagram. Kirstie was one of the most special relationships I've ever had. I love you, Kirstie. I know we will see each other again. In the last few years of her life, Alley said she felt she'd been blacklisted in Hollywood due to her support of the former President Donald Trump. Her family say her passion and zest for life inspired them to live life to the fullest, just as she did. Kamali Melbourne, Sky News.
Tim Allen paid tribute to Kirstie Alley on Twitter, saying, "A sweet soul pass on in Kirstie Alley. Sad, sad news. Prayers for all her family." Maria Shriver also wrote on Twitter, "I knew Kirstie for several decades and interviewed her many times. This is such heartbreaking news, as she had so much more life to live. She had a kind heart and a great spirit. She loved her family and she loved life. May she rest in peace." And Jamie Lee Curtis took to Instagram saying, "I've just heard the sad news that Kirstie Alley has died. She was a great comic foil in TV Scream Queens and a beautiful mama bear in her real life." And from Taylor Lautner, an honour working with and getting to know you, Kirstie, R.I.P. Quick look at the weather.
Anticipation is rising, and so is the atmosphere. Are you ready? The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Cold easterly wind will give way to an even colder northerly this week, bringing widespread frosts and some snow, I should say, to the north. It's going to start mainly dry, bright and chilly today, with an extensive frost in the north and the west.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Now, what is your word of the year or phrase? I know it's Sky News Breakfast, isn't it? But what else? Oxford Dictionary has revealed the word of the year, and it's the first time it's been chosen by the public. So what is it? Goblin mode, a type of behaviour which is unapologetically self-indulgent, lazy, slovenly or greedy, typically in a way that rejects social norms or expectations. There you go. That is the word of the year. Well, earlier, the Schools Minister, Nick Gibb, told me the pay demands of unions whose members are striking are unaffordable.
If all the unions' demands in the public sector were agreed, we'd be paying an extra £28 billion on the payroll. It's simply not affordable. We have to tackle the inflationary pressures in our economy. That's what we're seeking to do. That's what the autumn statement was all about. as well as introducing measures to help people with those cost of living increases, we also have to tackle inflation. That's what's causing households to pay higher bills. And these sorts of pay demands of 19% and so on are just not affordable in the public sector or indeed in the private sector. We just may need the unions to work with their employers and not to hold the country to ransom.
OK. Also asked him about the RMT union. Bring that to you very shortly. Indeed, tomorrow is here. Interesting what he's saying about the unions, how much it's going to cost, and also about U-turns.
That's right. So, big U-turn from the government last night, although the schools minister insisted it wasn't. They were just having a rethink. Basically, the government committed in its manifesto in 2019 to building 300,000 homes a year. But a lot of MPs have been getting very upset about individual developments in their constituency, saying councils then feel they have to say yes to developments which they don't think are right. And a very large group of MPs, there were 58 of them publicly named, but they say they had 100, said we simply don't want these housing targets anymore. And yesterday, after a series of meetings with Michael Gove, the Levelling Up Secretary, a compromise was announced whereby if MPs don't like housing developments and they think that they adversely affect the character of the area, so you can see that might be quite broad, then they don't have to have them. And that's quite a significant U-turn from Rishi Sunak. We're expecting that there may well be another one coming quite soon on wind farms, and that's effectively in the other direction. Some MPs didn't want housing developments, but some of them now do want onshore wind, which the government under David Cameron banned a few years ago. And in fact, Rishi Sunak told us in the summer that he wanted to keep that ban. I think we've got a bit of Rishi Sunak speaking to us in that debate.
We do. Onshore wind, forgive me, yes or no?
No.
OK, you've changed your mind?
No, I haven't. Last night I was asked a question, I didn't fully understand it and I misspoke, but my position on that is the same as it's been.
So he told us he didn't want it. Now, a group of MPs... I looked at the amendment last night being brought by Simon Clarke, who's not one of Rishi Sunak's close allies. He had about 35 names. That's not quite enough to defeat the government yet, but I suspect he's got a few more behind the scenes. So will he have to U-turn on that too? There's a sense that the Prime Minister is being very easily pulled in different directions, and the speed with which MPs are gathering 40 or 50 people to force the government's hand is looking quite... it's all happening very quickly. And talking to MPs last night, they said, if you get the sense that Tory MPs are not happy, you'd be right.
OK, and as far as the Minister this morning is concerned, he says it's not a U-turn, because he said absolutely in August, absolutely, categorically, no onshore wind farms. This is what the Minister said today.
What he's said in the summer, what he's saying now, is that the emphasis must be on offshore wind. And that is still the position of the government. But, of course, we'll continue to talk to members of Parliament as we take this legislation through Parliament. And that is how our system has always worked, and it should always work.
Not always that you get rebellion so quickly. They will find out in the next couple of days whether that's going to change too.
Yeah, tomorrow's Take at 9 o'clock. Looking forward to it. Thank you. Now, it's not just the railways going on strike. Coffin builders, bin collectors and brewers are joining an ever-growing list of workers taking industrial action over pay this winter. Joining us now is Unite's National Lead Officer, that's Onse Kazab. Hello, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. So talk to me in a bit more detail, if you would please, sir, about the many sectors that you're representing and what we are expecting in the coming weeks.
Good morning, and a pleasure to be on. We organise across 41 different sectors. There is a strike wave taking place at the moment because our members are having to cope with the cost of living and have decided to do something about it. That includes our members who work as security guards at Harrods. That includes our members at Felixstowe. It includes our members at Shelter. It includes our members working for the bus company Abellio. And of course, we represent people in the NHS as well. We are more than happy to negotiate with all of those employers, but unfortunately, an awful lot of them won't. And that includes the NHS. The reality, and I heard the Minister earlier on, it takes, I think, some brass neck for ministers who have subsidised lunches to be telling our members who are now relying on food banks that they shouldn't be taking action on pay, and to somehow imply that we are holding the country to ransom. That is absolutely not the case. Our laser focus is on making sure that we win fair pay for our members.
Are we looking at potentially coordinated action? Is that what the unions are trying to do to bring this government, you would say, to their senses?
We would look at where we've got employers in the same sector or where we've got members working for the same employer. And of course, we would look to coordinate action in that way. I think that just makes absolute sense. But that's part of us being absolutely focused on the workplace and doing everything that we can to make sure that our members are a priority and our members win fair pay.
What about if the public is against you? Does it bother you if you don't have public support for your strike action?
Well, at the moment, we do have significant public support. And the point I would make is this. Our members are the public. The trade unions are still the largest voluntary organisation in this country. Our members use those services. And in many cases, our members are taking action actually to save those services. I will give the example of the NHS, where we have members being balloted. It's about pay, but it's also about saving the NHS. 133,000 vacancies in the NHS in England alone. That is because of poor pay and conditions. And our members will be taking action, not just for fair and decent pay, but to save that service. And I think the public understand that.
Are we, talking about the private sector now, are we not to believe companies when they say that they can't afford pay rises in line with inflation?
No, if you take some examples, be very specific about it. We've got members at Harrods who are taking strike action. They're making profits. We've got members at the Abellio Bus Company. They are making profits. The reality is that the leading companies in the UK over the past year have increased their profit margins by 2/3 to higher levels than what they were at pre-pandemic levels. So we do not accept that argument.
What about your members, I think baggage handlers at Heathrow, planning to go on strike for 72 hours the weekend before Christmas? If people miss their flights, how much sympathy do you think they'll have for your cause then?
Our preference is not to take strike action. Our preference is to sit down and negotiate an agreement. So if the employers are willing to negotiate and will put reasonable offers, we will always sit down and negotiate. Strike action is an absolute last resort.
So what would you say to people who would perhaps lose their Christmas holiday because of strike action?
We don't want anybody to lose their Christmas holidays. We don't want anybody to be negatively impacted. That's not the point of this. But we have members who are relying on food banks. I visited a picket line a few days ago where I was speaking to somebody who slept in his car, not because he wanted to be early on the picket line, but because he'd been evicted because he couldn't afford to pay his rent. That's the situation we're now in. That's why we're having to take strike action. We hope in a lot of these cases that it doesn't come to that and the employers put a fair deal for our members and we can negotiate settlement and not have to resort to strike action.
Mr. Kassab, good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Looking at some of the other headlines for you on the programme this morning. Here we go. Elon Musk's medical device company Neuralink is under federal investigation for potentially violating animal testing law. The company is thought to have killed around 1,500 animals following experiments since 2018. It's currently developing a brain implant it hopes will help paralysed people walk again. A state memorial has taken place in Beijing in tribute to the former leader Jiang Zemin, who died last Wednesday. The Chinese president was one of many Chinese officials in attendance and paid tribute to the late politician for ensuring the Communist Party's survival from political storms. Ukraine's government is warning of more emergency blackouts after Russia again hit power infrastructure with airstrikes. Russia has fired a barrage of missiles at targets across Ukraine for the 8th time in 8 weeks, just as emergency blackouts were due to end. Ukraine says 4 people were killed. And Ukraine is switching to emergency shutdowns to stabilise its power grid after those latest Russian missile attacks. Joining us now is Andrew Wood. He's a former British ambassador to Russia and Associate Fellow at Chatham House. Hello to you. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning, Sir Andrew. What's your take, first of all, on these continuing targeted of the energy supplies that means that they can't have water, they don't get light, and heating is a big challenge?
Well, it's indicative of the fact that the Russian forces prefer to use bombardment of various sorts than actually come to fighting, because they're at present in a rather difficult situation. They're not doing very well militarily, so they've gone for this instead. I don't like it. I don't think anybody else does like it. And it's not brave or likely to have good results from the Russian point of view.
Up to 40% of the Kiev region, we're told, is without electricity. Big challenges for the winter ahead. And it looks as though there is some infighting now. President Zelensky turning on Klitschko, the mayor of Kiev, saying he's doing a poor job setting up emergency shelters. I'm guessing this is exactly what the Russians would like to see happen.
Yes, of course. If the Ukrainian government and government structure starts to quarrel too much with itself, that's going to happen. But at the same time, there are bound to be some differences. That's only natural. I don't think either of those two men would wish to get into a position where the Russians would start to be dominant over government decisions.
We've heard from the French President, Emmanuel Macron, commenting that the West should consider Russia's need for security guarantees if Moscow agrees to talks to end the war. I mean, some might balk at that, but is that the way forward?
No, it's laughable in the present situation. If, of course, we ever got to the situation where the Russians were willing to negotiate a resolution which would allow Ukraine to do what it wants, which is to be independent, to look after itself, and to be free from Russian interference, that would be a different matter. But there's actually, at present, nothing to forgive the Russians for. What they're doing is pure aggression, unjustified, and a structure of what amounts to murder.
Let me quote to you what Monsieur Macron actually said. I'm sure you know, but it's for the benefit of our viewers. He was talking to the French TV station TF1. He says, Europe has to think about how to give guarantees to Russia the day it returns to the negotiating table. In other words, the Europeans need to give Russia something in order for them to want to come to the negotiating table in the first place.
Well, I know what you said, but the real meaning of that is that Ukraine should make concessions which would make the Russians wish to start negotiating and press for further concessions. It's also interesting that he uses the word Europe, as so many of them do, as though his opinions were the opinions of everybody in the EU, which they certainly are not. He's had quite a lot of criticism for that from people in the Baltic states, for example, and from Finland and so on. It's produced quite a strong reaction against it.
Talk to me about the German Chancellor, if you would, as well, as we're on the matter of European politicians, Olaf Scholz, of course, saying that Putin's plan to divide the West has failed. Is it too early to say that?
Well, yes. It's certainly not the Russian perception, because when people like Scholz himself makes certain sorts of comments, they would look for a split within the EU and within the West as a whole. And certainly what Macron was suggesting is conveys to the Russians that we collectively should be making decisions now about what sort of things we should concede to the Russians in order for there to be some sort of peace achieved. Very few people in the east of Ukraine, or for that matter in our country, believe that the Russians are in any position or any wish to negotiate fairly. They're not going to negotiate to have an independent Ukraine, able to decide its own future and able to act on democratic principles rather than principles of authoritarian rule, which is what Putin does.
So, Andrew, just before I let you go, I'm sure you've seen the images of President Putin driving over the bridge from Russia to Crimea that was blown up a month or so ago now. How do you think that will play in Moscow particularly?
Well, I note that he's not actually driving a Russian car. It's a Mercedes. It was designed, I imagine, to overcome the fact that he has never been anywhere near the area of the struggle between Russia and Ukraine, but he's been stuck in Moscow. So it's meant to show that they're making progress and that he is in charge of that and is competent and so on, which is the same sort of political gesture that Zelensky has made by going to Kherson, for example, or any other parts of Russia, of Ukraine, sorry.
Yeah. It's good to see you, Sir Andrew. Thank you for taking the time and for your expertise as always. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Weather very, very bad indeed in Ukraine at the moment. Sub-zero temperatures, snow on the ground in an awful lot of places. Here in the UK, of course, we don't get the sort of temperatures that they do there, but cold temperatures and perhaps even snow are on their way over the next few days. Alex Burkle is a senior operational meteorologist at the Met Office. He's with us now. Hello to you. Thanks very much indeed for joining us on the programme this morning. Well, I need my big coat.
Yes, temperatures really are going to plummet as we go through this week, really, and it's going to last for quite a while. You probably already noticed over the weekend it felt cold. That's because we had an easterly wind, and it was a brisk one at that. So that added to the cold feel. But as we go through today and into tomorrow, the winds are going to background and come from more of a northerly direction. And as you'd expect, that makes it even colder still.
Where will we see snow?
So the greatest snow risk will be in places that are exposed to that northerly wind. So northern Scotland, that's where we've got a weather warning out for the whole of Wednesday. That's because we could see 5 to 10 centimetres building up over above 200 metres or so, so modest higher ground. But other places are likely to see a little bit of snow perhaps as we go through this week, particularly later on in the week as a few showers start to push their way southwards. It's not a guarantee that everywhere will see anything. By the nature of showers, they're very hit and miss. And so it's very difficult to forecast exactly where they're going to fall. But the most likely places to see the snow will be northern Scotland.
OK, so the rest of the country, rest of the British Isles so far probably won't. What about as we head through December?
So, yeah, this week, most places will actually stay largely dry, and it's actually going to be quite bright. There'll be a lot of sunshine to come, which is a bit of a different story to what we've had recently. So for many, yes, it is actually going to be sunny and dry this week, but bitterly cold. And it's not just by day, it's also by night that we're going to see the temperatures dropping. So tonight I'm expecting lows of around -5, -6 in some places. And as we go through the week, by the weekend, there's a potential we could get into negative double figures, which is going to make it very cold indeed. It does look like this cold weather is going to continue as we go through the weekend and into next week. There's a bit of uncertainty thereafter. We could see something milder coming up from the southwest, or we could hold on to this cold northerly wind. And so it looks like some cold temperatures are going to stay with us for a little while yet.
Here's the big question everybody wants me to ask. Is it going to snow for Christmas?
Well, looking back on records, it's around just over 50% of our Christmases are technically white. By that, I mean at least one snowflake is reported somewhere in the UK. Now, that's not the picturesque views that everyone has of, sheets of snow on the ground and going sledging with their kids. But what we can expect is some further cold weather to come as we go through December. As I said, there are signs that there could be something a bit milder as we go through next week. And if that wins out, then we'll probably see temperatures closer to average as we go towards Christmas Day. So it's all to play for. At the moment, I think there is a chance that we could see a bit of snow, but there are no strong signs of it being severe or widespread.
OK, and because it's so cold now, is that anything to do with global warming, or is that just cyclical?
So this is just weather at the moment. We have a northerly flow coming towards the UK, and so we're going to see temperatures plummeting because of that. So it's literally just because of where our air is coming from. So we've seen temperatures like this before. It's not totally out of the ordinary, but it's not an every year occurrence. You have to go back to 2017, 2018 for the last time that we had a cold spell like this at this time in the year. It's usually slightly later on in the winter, around January, February time, when we're looking at negative double figures at night. So it is cold, particularly for December, but it's just because of where our wind is coming from.
OK. It's great to talk to you, Alex. Thanks very much indeed for explaining that to us. Thank you.